It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we take a medical turn right now, and probably one of the most important conversations that the world needs to be having right now. So it bodes well that we are just ahead of World Diabetes Day. That's on the 14th of November, and we're going to dive into what you really need to know about diabetes. We hear the word said so much. There are so many misnomers and so many hard-hitting facts that we need to take account of. Now, with nearly 540 million adults living with it worldwide. Just take that on board. It is more important, part of the human condition. It's more important than ever to understand how lifestyle choices can help manage or even prevent the condition. Let's be preventative. And this morning we are joined by Dr. Chanel Martinison, a medical doctor from Inno Health Medical Centers, alongside dietitian Carla Lawrence, who are here to break down the basics from spotting symptoms to some practical tips that we can employ right now on diet and self-care, because we've got to care about ourselves. I want to say this is the result of the consumer culture, and we get what we deserve. And I say that to myself more than anyone else, because it is a choice ultimately, and take nothing away from those that are suffering from severe cases. And please, I am not a medical expert, but I have just lived in this space for very long. So Doc, I'm going to start with you. Type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes, the three terms that we hear most often. Can you break that down for us?
Okay, so firstly, what is diabetes? In our bodies, we've got a little organ right over here that's called the pancreas, okay? So when the pancreas releases insulin, that's the problem that happens with diabetes, is that the insulin release is actually the problem. So when we take in glucose, when we take in our Gatsby, and we take in rice and pasta...
And we don't stop taking
Yeah, we take it in and in and in. There's glucose that breaks down, and the insulin actually needs to be released to take away the glucose out of the bloodstream. So with type 1, it's usually an autoimmune condition, and it's usually in younger patients. And that's when the insulin is not enough, when your pancreas actually does not have enough insulin. That's when you need to inject the insulin to take it in.
Hence the pen.
Type 2 is usually like, you know, the more metabolic lifestyle ones, that the choices that you spoke of. Sometimes it is genetic, but if it's in the family history, then it can be there, but it usually is when the pancreas doesn't produce enough or good enough insulin to use, and then we need to take in medication to help the pancreas release insulin. And then gestational diabetes is related to pregnancy. So it's hyperglycemia or high sugar levels in pregnancy, and that can cause some complications for the baby and the mom. So it's usually just in the pregnancy. And unfortunately, if you have diabetes, gestational diabetes, you are at risk of getting diabetes later on in your life.
Yeah, I mean, we actually went through, myself and my gorgeous wife went through a similar sort of gateway. It's just another thing to spice up the pregnancy, just another thing to terrify you as you go through that. Obviously, there is a correlation between diet, and that's where a lot of the choices come in. But I say that with absolutely no judgment, because there is sugar in everything. We are living within a society that has made it very difficult to make those choices. So let's put that on the table starting out. But when we look at the diet, what are the heavy hitters? What should we be avoiding, and what kind of leads us down the dark path?
Okay, so we're always looking at what we have to avoid, but we don't always look at what we should include.
Thank you.
So I think looking at it more from that perspective is important. So including things like fiber, your lean meats, healthy fats. So those are all the things that people always say.
Don't be so shy when you say healthy fats. Just say healthy fats in the world, okay? We might actually need them.
Yeah, they are healthy fats. So we need fats, we need carbohydrates, we need protein. They all provide energy for the body, so they're all needed in the body. It's just the amount, it's the type that we take in that's important.
Can I say processed is bad as a jumping off point, or is that maybe a little 10-year outdated? When we look at the good things to take in, is there a jumping off point?
So if you think about processed and what processed foods are, like so many foods are processed. Bread is processed, it's made. So it depends on what you're looking at. So you have to look what's in the product. So the content of the product. So a lot of clients normally ask me about reading labels, and I would say to them, read the ingredients list more than the label. So what is in there? What are the hidden things in there that's not good for you, that's actually going to cause those sugar spikes?
And that's how you force the culture to shift, because we do put pressure on those providing the nutrition when we make those sort of choices. Warning signs. What should we be aware of that we have now crossed the line and we are in murky waters?
So we usually call it increased thirst. So if patients feel like they're excessively thirsty all the time, not just when it's a hot day, it's like literally you need water.
Quench it,
So it's increased thirst, increased urination. So if you go into the bathroom a lot, increased like you needing to eat also, like we call it polyphagia. You also need to eat a lot. Weakness, feelings of weakness, blurry vision, headaches. Unintentional weight loss is not always a good thing.
Okay,
it could be a sign.
Unexplained.
Like you're not actually gymming or exercising, but you're losing so much weight. It would be a good time to speak to your doctor because 1 in 10 people are actually affected by diabetes worldwide.
Sure.
So if you notice any of these things, or even if you're just over 40, speak to your doctor and do a blood
I
test.
was about to say, until you got to the dropping weight without any reason, I was like, well, that's basically being 40, I think, is what you've just ticked every box there.
So just speak to your doctor if you can do some blood tests and we can actually just check.
Okay, and then just Ozempic. Okay, I just need to say it. Okay, get it out there. We might touch on that in just a moment. We are talking about diabetes ahead of World Diabetes Day. When you've got nearly 500 million or more than 500 million people suffering from a condition worldwide, that does become a little bit part of the human condition. But we want to get practical, so our panel is going nowhere. If you've got any questions or comments, please hit us up on the social media platforms. We'd love to hear from you.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we continue a very interesting conversation that is kind of pertinent for all of us, unfortunately, because it expresses culture and how we live around diabetes in particular, and awareness ahead of the World Diabetes Day, which is coming up fast. We've got Dr. Chanel Martinezson here and dietitian Carla Lawrence ready to save the world. And this time we'll be diving into the impact of exercise, common diabetes myths, and some of the latest advancements in diabetics and diabetes care, because things are moving very, very quickly. Our mindset is moving very, very quickly. We are understanding that to be healthy is to move. And because that's what we are. We are bodies, we are computers that must get information in to produce a result. What role does movement play when it comes to diabetes specifically?
It's absolutely important. I'm a big advocate for physical exercise and movement. So it helps with so many things with regards to diabetes. So it helps with insulin resistance. So in type 2 diabetes, a lot of the patients they don't receive the glucose very well. Their cells don't receive insulin very well, So it's very important to exercise because that helps with insulin in the body. And then it also lowers blood sugar levels. So when we exercise, we're expending energy and our muscles are taking in the glucose. So that decreases the blood
you would need possibly the energy in your system. But to take all that energy in and not use it, your body's got to do something with it. And often that's where the system breaks down.
So it's using the energy that you're taking in as well. So too often we're taking too much energy and we don't use the energy. So that's basically the problem. So we need to use the energy, and that's where exercise comes in. So
3 kids' parties this weekend. And you sit with the sugar
the balance,
equation, you know. Okay, another lap, go. Another lap. Let's talk about complications, because it can escalate, and it can escalate quite quickly and become very severe, even death, I understand. So talk me to, or speak to that specifically.
Okay. So diabetes is not just about the sugar in your body. It actually affects so many more things systemically. So from the top, it's the eyes. It can affect the oral health, so you can get increased infections. It has cardiovascular disease risks. You can affect your kidneys, and patients don't actually know that. When I tell them we need to check your kidneys, they're like, but I have diabetes. Like, they work together. You need to check that your kidneys are doing well. So it affects your kidneys. It can affect your peripheral neuropathies, or like, big words, your vasculature, so your nerves. So it can actually, when patients have the pins and needles or, like pain in their legs, it can actually be a complication of diabetes. And the reason we want to treat diabetes is because we want to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, because that's what patients
That's the
die
heavy
from.
hitter.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's just another reminder that it's kind of an overlapping system, so it
Yes.
touches on so many different parts
Yeah.
of our overall health and well-being. So many Dr. Googles out there
Yeah.
maybe leading us down the wrong path. What are some of the biggest misconceptions in your space when it comes to diabetes?
There's a lot of misconceptions. So
It's
one
quite a
of
sigh. Sure, let it out. Let your baggage out. It's okay, yeah.
that's often where we start in a consultation because people come in with misconceptions. So
They've already diagnosed
yeah,
themselves,
when
yeah.
you've been diagnosed with diabetes, people think it's like the end. I'm going to die. My legs are going to get cut off. I'm going to lose fingers, that type of thing. So it does happen, but that is a misconception because that can be managed. So you don't have to have those things happen to you. You can live a good life. You can live a healthy life in managing your diabetes. So that's a big misconception. And then also carbohydrates is always the biggest misconception because people think they need to cut out carbs, they can't eat carbohydrates, they can't eat sugar, they can't have fruit. So that's normally one of the biggest things that I have to bust from the beginning. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest misconceptions.
Just put it
as well.
in its place. And I think that's the thing. Every food has its place.
Yeah.
Let's keep the hectic processed sugars
Absolutely.
for the parties, for the celebrations and those moments.
Yeah.
But the baseline, again, to use that term, the structure of your diet needs to have that healthy core.
Yeah.
And you can do that. So where are we at? We've seen massive advancements in the medical space over the last couple of years. And I think AI is driving a lot of that because we can process so much more data now. What's got you most excited? What are some of the big things happening in the scientific or the medical space at
Yeah.
least?
So you mentioned the word Ozempic. Just preparing for this, I actually did a webinar with an endocrinologist to actually learn and see. And since 2008, we've actually there were more studies done to actually include the cardiovascular disease risk, to include the older patients. And there is actually, in certain conditions, a place for those glucagon-like peptide inhibitors, and then there is the sodium glucose, the SGL, it's big words, but there are places, and people know it as Ozempic, Saxenda, Victoza. They know it as those things in the market. But those actually have really been helping patients, especially with like known cardiovascular, because that's what we've touched on now. The cardiovascular risk is important, and that is the biggest driver of deaths and the mortality in our country. But definitely it has a place in it. So we're not against it. There's a place. Sometimes type 1 diabetics need the insulin because they need insulin because they don't have insulin. But in type 2, there is a place for those newer kids on the block.
To help the body along. And we are learning a lot, but the bottom line is speak to a professional before you do anything in this space.
Yes.
We ultimately only have one body, and I think we spend the first 20, 30 years abusing it.
Yeah.
Then the penny drops and we make these conscious decisions. I think if you're intentional about how you're eating, the structure of your diet, maybe look into a little bit of intermittent fasting, something along those lines. There are ways that you can mitigate what we are talking about, but ultimately, if you've picked up on any of the more serious symptoms that we've spoken about, speak to your doctor. Guys, thank you so much.
Pleasure.